On this episode of SSI Executive Conversations, Brian Segal of Shurig Solutions sits down with Christopher Ward. Chris is a Chief Marketing Officer with 20 years' experience in the industry. On this episode, they discuss marketing in conjunction with medtech, research and development, and marketing in conjunction with mergers and acquisitions.
Hey, we are privileged to have Chris Ward on our SSI Executive Conversations podcast today. Chris is a 20-year medtech marketing pro who developed the market planning process for GE Healthcare and later served as a divisional chief marketing officer at Covidien and later Medtronic. He was responsible for growth in its $2 billion U.S. instrumentation business, launching 19 products in a 3-year span. He's no stranger to early stage ventures either, having joined Hyperfine to launch a highly novel bedside MRI system, where he built the full sales and marketing front end of the business, which ultimately led to the company's IPO. He'll tell you that his mission is to put the customer at the heart of the business and product planning decisions, achieving what he calls radar lock on customer priorities and realities. Chris, thanks so much for being with us today to share some of your insights. I wanted to start off with marketing, right? Is that Super Bowl ad stuff?
Well, Brian, first, thanks for having me on. But I've certainly been asked, get us on the Super Bowl, and I've looked up the rates and gotten the rate card.
Good idea.
I get me on Jim Cramer by Thursday. I've even talked at one point in my career to Kathy Ireland's agent, believe it or not. I'm not sure that was the winning move for a med tech company, but nonetheless, you never know what's going to come across your desk.
I got you, man. I got you. So marketing, right? You're talking about product management, or are you talking about upstream, downstream marketing, talking about, marketing communication? Sometimes I'm confused. I thought marketing was really marketing.
Yeah, so Brian, slices in the pie is what I would say. David Packard of Hewlett Packard co-founding fame has a great quote that I love for its backhandedness. He said, "Marketing is far too important to be left to the marketing department." So ouch.
Good point.
But I also love it because when you really look at marketing, and that word is incredibly confused, but when you look at marketing, it's at its best, it is a philosophy of management. The idea that we're going to have a department that's going to really think about the customer, that seems all wrong. I mean, a business is a collection of costs, and revenue comes from outside the company. It kind of feels like that's something we should be focused on every breathing minute in medtech or in any industry. Ultimately, I think the purpose of a business is to create a customer. And so for myself, as a marketing, I'll say pro here, but what I think about is marketing creates the opportunity, the environment where a product and a customer come together, and then sales closes that final mile. So everything that goes into making that moment happen, whether it's the product, it's the service, it's the awareness, it's whatever, is all a part of what we're going to call marketing.
So obviously, Chris, you define some of the marketing pieces to us. Educate us on really the differences and why it's important for those pieces to be aligned within an organization.
Good question, and it's something I've 20 years I've kind of felt that these bits and pieces of marketing, as we previously described, kind of spread throughout companies. So if you think about, let's say, a CFO, and you think about their organizational chart and pyramid. I don't like the word pyramid, but think of their organizational structure.
Right.
You know what you're going to find inside there. We know there's going to be tax, there's going to be, controllership. We know there's going to be FP&A and treasury and investor relations. You could lay that out. In a CHRO, you could do the same thing. There'd be staffing, there'd be comp and benefits, there might be labor relations and, other elements of that. When you get to, and I think about your craft, you and Darwin and Roxanne and the team at Shurig Solutions, when somebody says to you, "Hey, I'm looking for a commercial lead or a marketing lead," or there's probably a lot of questions like, what do you mean by that? And so just if you look at one of the symptoms of what I'll call confusion in our industry and in a lot of B2B, look at the titles. So the title today is Chief Commercial Officer, which tends to have a heavy sales component. Used to be a Chief Revenue Officer, but that wasn't customer friendly sounding. So we maybe have faded that one. Used to be a Chief Sales Officer. And then you have Chief Product Officers in startups, and you have Chief Marketing Officers. So what? What is that? So who's doing what, and how do you create value across all of that? It's a little scattershot. So what I typically draw for people when I say, okay, let's talk about, forget the titles, forget the org chart. Let's talk about how we create value and how we create the environment in which sales can occur. What I'll draw is the Audi logo. So we're all familiar with Audi, the global brand and auto manufacturer. The Audi logo is four circles in a line, and then they overlap. So there's kind of like Venn diagrams, three overlaps and four circles.
Right.
What we'll draw in the first circle is R&D. Now, we're not going to call that a part of, say, marketing, but we're going to say that is responsible for creating ultimately something that is transacted for money. So very important that they're dialed into the marketplace. The next circle we're going to draw would be product management. And product management says, I need more wattage, more amplitude, or have you thought about the Japanese female surgeon with a small hand? How's this device going to work for that versus a large, American? We have to think about those things. So, and we see career paths bounce between R&D and product management.
Okay.
The third circle, I'm running out of hands. The third circle is going to be in region or in country marketing, what's typically called downstream marketing. So this is the team that's catching that product and saying, okay, what price? Let me build the microsite. Let me do some tweeting about it. Whatever that is, let me train the sales force, build the PowerPoint, create the PDFs, all of those things that prepare to go to market. Fourth circle, Salesforce, as you would expect, the final mile, taking that product and connecting up, doing their targeting and working through salesforce.com and creating that funnel. And then overall, it would wrap with the customer touching all of that. Two things I would add, Brian, in terms of medtech that are critical across all four. Regulatory and clinical touch all of that. Like, we are nothing without guidance of people who think nothing about the regulations and the rules and the laws and the considerations in our industry. Those people are part of my marketing plans all the time, and clinical affairs as well. Like, I wish I had gone to med school, woulda, shoulda, coulda, but we need that guidance as to how clinicians think, whether they're physicians or nursing or healthcare administrators. We need all of that HP mindset that comes from a med affairs type organization. That's how I see it.
So, Chris, I really appreciate that Audi analogy. One of the most important things I think that you mentioned was how they interline with each other, how they lock in with each other. Obviously, at the very end of that, you're talking about the customer engagement, why clinical is so important. This seems pretty obvious, to a pretty obvious focus on companies who've already launched products and rely on the voice of the customer to really continue improvement. But how important is it for companies in their R&D? Because you mentioned R&D, particularly in their R&D stage, and really brainstorming on commercialization strategies.
Yeah, great question. And we are certainly nothing without R&D. I know we're going to talk a little bit more about M&A side of that, which is sort of like
Right.
outsourced, R&D. I mean, there's a lot of ideas, and they can't all come from inside our walls. But to answer your question more directly, Brian, one of the things I like and one of the things I advise companies is that they really think about a target customer. And often when I ask that question, people will say, "Oh, you're urologists," and I might want to say, "Well, what kind or what institution are they in?" So we're going to go to the world of computed tomography, CT scanning, imaging, radiology. And when you scan the torso, the heart is beating and moving, of course. There's respiration, but the heart is moving quickly, and you really couldn't image that. It's like digital camera shutter lag when we all first got our digital cameras. You got the kid's foot, and you missed the whole scene.
Right.
So
Right.
that was really uncharted territory for CT, and you want CT because the image fidelity, the quality, the speed at which it operates, you want all that. So when the physics and the mechanical and electrical engineering got to the point that we could now image the beating heart, the world of cardiac CT was born. Now, while that's going on at a major imaging company, I'm working on a view. A question came across my desk and it said, "Hey, Chris, how would you think about," in this case, it was the United States, the US hospital market? We got 5,500 hospitals. Like, how are they best grouped and organized? And we all have this sense that, when you're walking into a major, top tier academic medical center, and when you're walking into a rural hospital, and you might know something when you're a different feel when you go into a government hospital. So we know that there's some differences, but we hadn't really articulated it. So that's what I was trying to do, was map this out, get it on a PowerPoint page, and so we could think about it. And we laid out 5 different hospital types. And in subsequent work, as we did this in other markets and geographies around the world, it turns out 3 of those by the by, are universal. They show up in every healthcare market, whether you're in a private, healthcare model or in a social public healthcare model. Like they show up. There's these archetypes. So product launches, goes into market, and immediately sales start coming in from three of the segments. I wouldn't expect it in all five, right? Not every single person drives a Honda. Some choose the BMW, some
Right.
choose, the Nissan, whatever it may be. So it starts selling in three. The first we would expect. The first is academic medical centers. Oh my gosh, we can image the beating heart. You know what this does for advancing the science, for the high acuity patients we see in our hospital? Like, this is a game changer. Take my money. That we would expect. The next we would also expect, and we can all think about, Da Vinci over the last 20, 25 years and Intuitive kind of coming into the marketplace and the billboards and the kind of promotion that when the hospital in the IDN on the west side of town got one, it wasn't a few months until the hospital on the east side got it. We saw this with cardiac CT. It was also that kind of technology. Oh my gosh. And so we saw that happen. It was the third type of customer that wowed us. And people came to me and said, "Hey, Ward, nice job. There are better days ahead for you. Good effort." And let me tell you about the customer. So the customer was not who you would expect. It was a more rural customer. I think on a bed size basis, it was in the 90 to 100 range. It's been some years, but it didn't have certain specialties. It wasn't a trauma. Like you're like, And I was on my heels a little bit thinking about, why is this? So the answers we seek are not found in the building we sit in typically. So I go out to the market, I talk to customers, I talk to our sales force, I look at our funnel, and I dig in. It takes me a few weeks. Here's the answer. They were not buying the Porsche of CT scanning for taking it to the racetrack. They were not buying it to keep up with the Joneses. They were buying obsolescence protection. So I do this when I buy my home PC. I buy as many ports as I can get. I buy, as much screen real estate. I buy processor. And I probably look to Apple like I'm some kind of video game developer or something, a database or Bitcoin miner. And the truth is, I'm just cheap. I want that thing to go for 10 years, better if it can go 12 and not have to replace it in 4 or 5 years. That's exactly what this hospital was doing. They were buying obsolescence protection. So same product, sold for research, competitiveness, and sold for obsolescence protection. So if you were an engineer and you were thinking, I need to optimize for obsolescence protection, you would design in certain features around serviceability, around lifespan, or maybe better copper wiring that lasts longer. And if you were optimizing for performance, you would gut the race car, single seat, roll cage, like no back seat, no stereo. You would think about it very differently. That is the difference between liking a product and loving a product. When something's been optimized for you and your need state, oh my gosh, and that ignites markets. And so that is an example of when, marketing as a philosophy of management, you put it at the center of your business and everybody in the chain, whatever function they're in, can make decisions that optimize for that customer type.
And again, keeping that customer focused on, how do we build this thing? Where do we go from here? Critically important.
Yep.
Let's now take it to the M&A side, right?
Yeah.
And where marketing kind of fits in. Harvard Business Review released an article that stated that companies spend over $2 trillion with the T annually on acquisitions.
Yeah.
Yet 70 to 90% of those M&As are considered failures. You recently posted, your recent post on LinkedIn was really eye-opening on MedTech's trajectory in regard to M&A. What does this have to do with marketing?
When I was earlier in my career, I looked at it as sort of there was a little competition between organic and inorganic. And working on the organic side, I kind of saw it as almost like a failure of organic growth if we needed to go acquire something, spend a big
Right.
multiple, a lot of money, and go, you know, completely wrong. You have to admit your mistakes as you get older, but completely wrong point of view. Because of course, no matter how good and how well funded the internal R&D teams are, we can't account for all of the innovation potential in the industry. There's going to be great ideas outside of a company, of course. And really having that market scanning kind of view in the market and saying, what are we seeing out there? What are customers talking about? What are the unmet or undermet needs that exist? That's really important. That's kind of the second side of the marketing function is the listening and reflecting back into the organization what's happening in the marketplace. So a story here of an acquisition. This is a product that was born from a surgical tech who is manning the laparoscope, in minimally invasive procedures. And as you put a scope, into anatomy, it's warm, there's fluids, there's condensation, it
Right.
gets smudged. And you get into like, there's got to be a better way to keep this thing clean and not have to kind of retract and reinsert and all of those things that just kind of are annoyances or risks potentially in certain
Right.
surgeries.
Right.
So that idea, we started to see that from our sales force show up on more surgical trays, around the world saying, we should look at this. So we got pretty excited about it, thought it could really add. We're in these types of cases, our sales channels deployed there. Why wouldn't you kind of add that to the bag? So the question came to me, Brian, and it was, hey, how much better is this than the warm water bath or than scrubbing like we do with our eyeglasses? We kind of clean off the tip of the camera. So we looked at it, and I did the research, double blind research, not knowing it's coming from Olympus or Medtronic or whomever. And we started to see there was real separation between this technology, this approach, and anything else, the current standard of care, the status quo.
Right.
So just going into the discussion with a target company and with a bank and knowing more perhaps than the inventor about how valued this is in the marketplace was a pretty big moment for us. And sure enough, like you said, 70 to 90% of acquisitions fail to meet their targets. This one was hitting pro forma in year 2 and year 3, which is still really good. Year 1 is a bit of a guess for sure, a guesstimate. So didn't hit a 10, but by looking at price, by figuring out how valued this was, able to drive that thing into, every OR in the country and around the world. It's an example of what, marketing done well can do in M&A.
Gotcha. Well, that's very interesting, and maybe our next topic will be some of the failures, unless you want to share some of the things that you've seen from, hey, they didn't pay attention to that. I don't know if you wanted to to share anything that you had there, or I also want to keep this on the hot topic and talk about growth of organizations.
Yeah,
Any,
so on the failure side, right? If maybe you never fail if you take a lot of lessons out of it. These things can be really expensive given the multiples, in the industry, of course. There's a lot of ways. I mean, there could be things that are hidden or not clear in the acquisition in any one of the functional areas. But working more on the commercial side, it really comes down to the goodness of fit, both for your channel, like are we in that call point in a meaningful way? Do we have the credibility? Do we have the permission to sort of represent that? Will they associate that with us? Really needs to be understood. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is to really get good at like market research. And we
right,
sort of almost laugh at that word, like, oh, the damn focus group. I'll give you an example of a focus group, and this is a 30-second story here. Is that
right,
I can think of a product that was launched by an imaging company that was motion correction. So one of the challenges with MRI exams is movement. It's a long exam, as we all know. It's you need to be really, really still. And you think about pediatrics, you think about Parkinson's, you just think about having to sneeze and what that does to image quality. So if you could have software that would correct for that level of motion and resample the data, it would be huge. And sure enough, one company had done that and introduced that. And sitting in a focus group, literally behind the one-way mirror with engineers, with sales. When I go to a focus group, I bring multi-functions into the room and we sit there and we eat our M&Ms and our pizza and we just listen. In this case, radiologists in Los Angeles, they were talking about this technology. And they didn't know each other, these radiologists. And one of them says, I thought one of them has this motion correction thing. It's pretty cool. And what they go on to say is, and they're like, well, who did that come from? That sounds awesome. And what they said, and I'll use a car analogy as a better, maybe a lingua franca here. They called it the Ford Camaro. They basically said, oh, I think the product is called Camaro, and I think it comes from Ford. Of course, the Ford Mustang and the Chevy Camaro are the two vehicles, but they crossed them because they didn't understand who it came from. The room I was in, my peers, the bottom fell out. I mean, we were mortified because it was our proprietary technology, a big deal in the industry. And it's an example of we learned in that moment a failure to communicate. The problem with communication is the illusion it occurred. We had not communicated well enough, consistently enough, clear enough that was us, and here were the benefits. So you really do hear the most amazing, damnedest things from customers, and it enriches your strategy right away. You
Great.
can't do enough customer
That's
insight.
a great story. Thank you for
Yeah.
definitely sharing that. And I want to, continue again, kind of this M&A, shift a little bit of gears, but still have M&A as a topic.
Mhm.
You're talking about M&A as companies become bigger and bigger with acquisitions. There are many things that change, right, within an organization. You've got culture change, you have alignments, you have responsibility changes.
Yeah.
For some people that are in the workforce, the big company is all they really know, right? And it's not uncommon for rifts to happen within those organizations, particularly in the M&A situation. We've seen that recently with a number of large organizations here in our market.
Yeah.
Um, for those people, maybe experiencing that and potentially having to shift from to shift to a smaller, more entrepreneurial startup company, what's your perspective? What it takes to make that shift. Because you've had experience in both.
So, for anybody who's been impacted in a reduction in force, you have my sympathies. And I think this dovetails, by the way, really the opportunity that's in front of you and the work that Brian and Darwin and the team do at Shurig Solutions. Realize that we're at this moment of great cross pollination. You may have a non-compete, you may not, and you're going to end up in some other place. And the experiences, the ideas, the richness that you have is making our industry better. I know that's a long-term view, and it may not take the edge off of what you're experiencing now, but ultimately our industry and therefore patients benefit from this. It's one of the reasons why I say non-compete agreements, which are starting to come up in dialogue, are, I look at that and say, hey, if we look at California, we look at Israel, places where non-competes don't exist, it's a really good thing for that cross-pollination, and we build richer solutions. We come up with bigger and better ideas. So number one, that's the macro view. On a micro view, having gone from big to small, what I will say is, 75. I think I heard Mike Minogue talk about this recently, the former chairman and leader of Abiomed, and he was talking about 75 to 80% of the companies in our industry are these startup, early revenue, not yet profitable businesses. And to really know medtech, and the way I managed my career was I wanted to jump into that small stage company and see what it's all about. And if some of the things that frustrate you in larger company life around, the battleship turning or the Queen Elizabeth that we say, like you will pivot a lot. You will need to, and that flexibility is a really important trait that you need to bring into it. People will say an open mindedness, but it's also like this ability, this agility to go make changes very quickly. You will do that a lot. So there's a level of hustle, there's a level of willingness to pivot and to change that you can't experience in larger, more organized companies.
Right.
I will also say that the boundaries of org charts and departments are very, very thin walls. And so what you should do is run towards the problems, whether they're kind of in your function, in your major or not. Chances are you are a bright, driven, curious, creative individual. You're in medtech for a reason. Jump to where the problems are. It may be something related to HR. It may be something related to sales. It may be a product design type issue. I did that a lot in startup life, and it enriched me. It brought me a lot. It engaged me. I mean, some of the most valuable months and years of my life were spent in a startup, just dog years, as you hear a lot. So it's a big moment, and I highly recommend to know our industry is to spend some time in those early stage, scale up type companies.
Yeah. And obviously there are differences, with the larger companies. You sometimes have all the bells and whistles, the cars and the expense accounts and that sort of thing. And from a startup perspective, you have to have that entrepreneurial mind, particularly that, hey, we're not going to have all this.
Yeah.
Budgets are critical, and we have to put that budget to really good use. So yeah, that's definitely something I really appreciate you sharing, because that mindset is different.
Yeah, it's a fantastic experience, and I know you work with a lot of companies, large, mid cap, and small, and like there is a different feel to them. But trust me, you don't label yourself or think of yourself as like a big company person because you're a med tech person first or a healthcare person first. You're in this again this in this industry for a reason, and there's a fit for you in those companies. They will value your experience.
Right. Well, I was going to ask you about your closing insights, but that really closed it out right there. But really, what I know or what I want to know from you is, what's in store for you. What's your future look like?
Yeah, I'll tell you. So, getting gray hairs is kind of where I'm at, and what I'll
Well,
say is,
welcome to the
so
club.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it happens to the best of us, right? Even you. So, I will say that in my personal life, in my family, the random bad luck health fairy visited us recently, and having a couple of kids and a wife, the four of us go through life together. Um, I had never really seen outside of L&D and the emergency department really the front end of healthcare until
Right.
serious illness visited my family. And looking at that and seeing all of the wonder, the engineering, the stacked innovation, the medical education all brought to bear on one little family and one little life is breathtaking. And it's always a magical moment when you step into an operating room, you step into any hospital. It really is. But when you look at it from that way, I can say that I've never been more charged about working in med tech. In this case, it was cancer. So whether it's oncology or any part, of healthcare, than I am right now because I've seen the wonder of what it does and how it changes lives. We are some incredibly lucky people to be in med tech and to be part of the betterment of human life. So that's what I'm looking for, is to figure out kind of really that next great move for me where I can dig into that, scale and grow and get some great stuff done. It's a
Well,
wonderful time to be in medtech, despite a little bit of movement here and reductions in force and those kinds of things. We're all going to be okay.
yeah. Well, listen, it was a pleasure again speaking with you. We've had many conversations, but
Yeah.
really appreciate you being here, sharing your insight. Have no doubt that you will, that trajectory is going to keep on continuing to go for you. And again, we look forward to to staying in touch and partnering and really watching you
Thanks.
grow. Yeah.
Brian, thank you. You guys are doing a great job, and I love the work and the approach and the culture that you and Darwin and the team have really brought. Thanks for the introduction, and cheers.
Well, we appreciate the expertise. Thanks so much.
You bet.
For the video recording of this podcast, along with additional resources, make sure to find us on the web at shurigsolutions.com and follow us on social media and LinkedIn at Shurig Solutions.